An interesting scenario is unfolding right now with the LA Clippers. We all know that the team is bad and they don't have their first round pick. And of course, the Thunder have their first round pick. I've talked about that scenario in multiple videos already this season and talking about the Clippers' plan of, yes, they don't have their pick this year, but they want to hopefully have some cap space. And the team being bad this year obviously is unfortunate, but wasn't necessarily their goal this year to be a top tier contender. However, one thing is working right now with the Clippers, and that is James Harden. James Harden statistically is having one of the best years that he has had in years, really going back to his time in Houston. You go and look at any season he had in Philly, any season he had with the Nets, this year is better than any of them, and it puts the Clippers in an interesting scenario because a big part of their plan over the next couple of years is to have this semi-competitive team, hopefully with Harden and Kawhi, and then let those guys' contracts just kind of come off the books as they try and bring in free agents in the summer of 2027. And all of that just assumes that those guys are going to be on the team between now and then. But Harden specifically is playing so well that I think there's a real possibility the Clippers could explore trading him for value this season. Now, you might be thinking, why would they do that? Why would they actively make their team worse, try to get future value in exchange for someone like James Harden when their team is already bad? He's the only good thing they have going, and they don't have their pick this year. Well, there's two reasons. One, them not having their pick is not going to change. They're not going to get that back. No matter what happens to the Clippers this season, whether they finish with the worst record in the league or they make the playoffs, that pick is not coming their way. That can't really change how you think about your team this year. You're not going to change that. And so, yes, trading away James Harden, presumably for future value, would make your team worse this year and then potentially give the Thunder a top 5 pick. But that could happen anyway, even with James Harden on your roster. So that doesn't necessarily, to me, just eliminate the possibility of trading away Harden. And then the second reason would be to get some kind of value. Can you get a pick? Can you get a young player, someone that you could potentially build around when you bring in some of those guys potentially in the summer of 2027? Harden is not on a long-term contract. I would be shocked if he is still on the team after the summer of 2027. And so getting some kind of value out of him now when he's playing extremely well, and there are some teams around the league that could actually use his skill set, to me, is an interesting possibility. Not to mention the fact that it might not be the Clippers that have the only choice here. James Harden might go to the team and say, hey, I thought we were going to be competing this year. I'm doing my part. I'm playing extremely well. I'd like to go elsewhere. Can you guys trade me? I think that's a possibility as well. James Harden has never been afraid in the past to kind of force his way into different situations when he feels like it's necessary. And so all of this could potentially lead to a middle of the season James Harden trade from the Clippers. Now, there's one gigantic issue with this that I've talked about in previous trade videos, and that is trying to find a team that is willing to trade something in exchange for one of these lead ball handler guard type players. Trae Young, Ja Morant, even someone like LaMelo Ball. Those guys obviously are significantly younger than Harden, but he's playing better than any of those guys, so he certainly would get kind of lumped into this trade bracket, I guess. But it's hard to find teams around the league that are desperate for perimeter help and that would actually need the skill set of someone like James Harden in terms of trying to contend at the top of the conference. When I looked around, you're looking at teams like Dallas that obviously needs guard help with Kyrie Irving being out, but they're kind of in the same spot that the Clippers are, where they are just bad. I don't really see them making some kind of midseason move. I think Houston is kind of a natural place to look as well, given Harden's history with the franchise and their need for some help in the backcourt there. But it's pretty well known that Ime Udoka, when he joined Houston as their head coach, kind of pushed them away from bringing in James Harden and had them bring in Fred VanVleet because he just felt like it fit his vision of the roster better. So I'm not sure that connection would work out super well. And then you start looking at some other teams and there just aren't a ton of options for James Harden trades realistically. The two teams that I was able to come up with were the Phoenix Suns first, and this would just be a straight up swap of Jalen Green in exchange for James Harden. And the concept for Phoenix would be they're pretty good this year. They haven't even really had Jalen Green for a lot of these games, and having Harden as a end of game guy you can count on, so there's not so much focus specifically on Devin Booker, would make a lot of sense for a team that is kind of in a similar position to the Clippers draft picks wise in terms of not owning all their future picks. And so just kind of trying to increase the overall level of competitiveness of their team after a pretty surprisingly good start to the season. The downside for them is they've created this culture of a team that plays really hard and plays defense, and as good as Harden has been offensively this season, I certainly would not put him in the category of players of what they currently have there in Phoenix, not to mention the fact that I'm not sure they'd be willing to trade away someone like Jalen Green, who is a pretty focal point piece of the Kevin Durant trade they made this past offseason, and someone that I'm sure they'd like to see continue to grow and develop. For the Clippers, it gets them that future value that they're looking for. It gives them someone they could potentially build around, gives them an injection of youth that this roster desperately needs. However, it does kind of interrupt some of the plans that they've already made here for the summer of 2027 with Jalen Green's contract running a little bit longer than they would hope. Now, it's not the end of the world because at this point, if they did make the move, it would be Jalen Green and Zubats, and that's pretty much your only two contracts in the summer of 2027. So it's not completely prohibitive, but it is a little bit going against what the plan generally has been for the Clippers to this point. And although the structure does seem realistic, I don't think these are necessarily natural trade partners, so I would say this is a deal that is unlikely to happen. The other team that I was looking at was much more desperate than a team like Phoenix, a team that needs help in the backcourt, a team that is desperate to be competent this season, that there's already been some rumors and rumblings about the team being frustrated, and they could potentially make a desperation move. This is a team we've already seen make desperation moves like this in recent memory, and that is the Milwaukee Bucks. They could potentially package together some salaries, including Kyle Kuzma and some other guys, maybe even a future pick as well, in order to bring in James Harden alongside of Giannis, and that allows them to keep Miles Turner, who of course they swapped out Damian Lillard essentially for, and then you bring in Harden in the Lillard spot, and then all of a sudden you've got Harden, Giannis, Turner, Ryan Rollins, all these guards and stuff that have been shooting really well for them. And then you move forward with that. And that gives the Bucks a better chance to be competitive this season. No disrespect to guys like Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis, but the way that Harden's playing right now, it's definitely going to elevate their team. They have a defensive infrastructure that in theory should be able to insulate Harden from some of the defensive issues that he's had over the years. And again, this would just be a desperation move for Milwaukee. If they're looking at this scenario and thinking, okay, if we make this move, our chances of Giannis staying beyond this season, potentially signing an extension, increase by some amount, whatever that is. It makes them more competitive this year, which makes Giannis more likely to stay. And is that increase worth it enough for us to trade away some future value here, as well as kind of attach us to what has at times been a chaotic player in James Harden? I would not make the move if I was Milwaukee, even as well as Harden has been playing. I would not necessarily want to attach myself to him when there's already so much uncertainty with the Giannis situation. But again, when it comes to being desperate, I could see this being a move that the Bucks would actually make. Whereas for the Clippers, the players you're getting back aren't great. Kuzma and Portis, you can move those guys elsewhere if you'd like, but getting some kind of draft pick out of James Harden to help you kind of build the next era of Clippers basketball, I do think would make sense. But there's one problem with all of this, and that is the organization under Steve Ballmer has just never really gone in this direction before. They've never really made trades in the middle of the year that made them actively worse. They've never quote unquote tanked, and the Clippers wouldn't even be tanking because they don't have anything to tank for because they don't have their pick. So this would be an organizational decision to actively make the team worse this year to get some kind of future value. And although on paper sometimes that would make sense in this scenario, I just don't see that actually happening from the Clippers' perspective. But it's an interesting dynamic, right? Because Harden's playing much better than anybody expected him to this year, but he's older. You're worried about injury stuff. Maybe you could get some value out of him now, but the team is already so bad. But even if they're able to win 5 of 7 games at some point, they could maybe sneak their way back into the play-in picture, which would obviously be an overall positive outcome given how poorly the year started for the Clippers. And it's just a situation that I did not anticipate. I didn't expect to be talking about James Harden trades coming into the season, but I think that's kind of where we're at now.